Hello guys, this is your friend and we are back with a new fanfic. And if you enjoy the fanfic, then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this. And now let's start the fanfic.
What if Naruto woke up to Hinata's unexpected morning surprise? Chapter 1. It was approximately 12:01 in the early morning, 1 minute after the day of that great cataclysm, the day when pain reigned and his wrath and godlike powers were known by the people of the Hidden Leaf. But, even more so, Naruto Uzumaki. The night culminated with Naruto sitting upright in bed, just as it did when he learnt of Jiraiya's death. In this moment, he knew nothing but blissful memories of the past, as in the present reality was far too painful to dwell. But these wonderful memories could only last for so long, and, even within them, he still ached. His heart felt like lead in his chest. Each pulse pulled him deeper into a dark abyss that was the embodiment of pain and suffering. His body was weak and numb. He couldn't help but get sucked in, and a part of him welcomed it. Just why did Granny Tsunade have to send Ero Sennin on such a dangerous mission? It was reckless. He may have been one of the 3 legendary Sennin, but even they made mistakes, Orochimaru, for instance. Naruto's eyes hooded morosely as he fell prone to reminiscence, and a fiercer heat dawned his stomach as the images began skipping by, like the pages of a thick journal. The night of Jiraiya's death. A grief-stricken Naruto sat up in bed, silent, pensive, his head hung as he mourned his sensei's untimely passing. On a table in the center of his room was a well-prepared cup of noodles, a cold bottle of water, and a soda that all sat sulking in neglect. It felt as if a dark, cloud-like shroud made of torment was lingering over his head. It was invisible but potent, and the intensity of his constricting chest justified that fact. If that old toad was really the Ero Sennin's master, then why didn't he save him? Why did everything have to turn out this way? If Ero Sennin were Hokage, he would never have sent Granny Tsunade on that mission, never. Hoping to cleanse his heart of this ever-growing grudge and to flee the ravenous beast that obviously fed upon the light of his soul, replacing it with that of darkness, Naruto left his room. Upon downing the stairs of the apartment complex, he looked up at the neon sign of a convenience store that depicted, open 24/7. Dazed, he would have stridden right past it. But, for some reason, the thought of something sweet his awareness. It made him remember the time when Jiraiya shared an isol with him during his Rasengan training. Now he sat on a bench beneath a streetlight, his back arched, his forearms resting on his legs. It was quiet except for the slightly distinct sound of moths tacking the light bulb overhead, and the screech of crickets thoroughly hidden in the neighboring brush. But Naruto heard nothing, nor did he care for the beautiful spectacle of the many flickering lights in village from where he sat. He only saw the memories he shared with his sensei up to this point, skipping through his mind like a flip book, distant, and in a somber shade of gray. His icicle had started to melt. A single droplet of its sweet flavor fell to the ground, which was soon accompanied by a stream of his tears. They rippled down his face, like a broken dam in dire need of repair. He wept soundlessly, his face an unreadable mask. He still couldn't accept the fact that Jiraiya was gone, that his sensei was no longer a part this world. All of a sudden, out of the pitch-black darkness, he heard a subtle voice. It was Iruka, and our hero did quick work to dry his tears upon realization. But it wasn't long before more tricked down his cheeks. The man took a seat at the opposing end of the bench. "I heard about Jiraiya-sama," he said with apparent condolence. His eyes then swayed emotionally, a gesture that won Naruto's utmost attention. "I wanted him to keep watching over me. I wanted to have him watch me become Hokage." Naruto smiled a wanly smile. "I only let Ero Sennin see my bad sides." Jiraiya-sama was always praising you," Iruka interjected. "He always spoke proudly of you, saying that you were like his own grandchild." Naruto's eyes widened in surprise. He believed that you were the only one who was going to inherit his will. In his mind, he had no doubt about your becoming a great Hokage. The man's eyes softened sympathetically. Jiraiya-sama will keep watching you. Even now, from somewhere. Slowly, the empathetic teacher stood and gazed up at a luminous full moon. He wouldn't praise you if he saw you being depressed. So just continue being the person we've all come to know. The person he always praised. He turned and knelt before the dejected teen, reaching for the melting icicle and broke it into two halves. You can't be depressed forever. Jiraiya-sama, one of the legendary Sennin, acknowledged you, his excellent student. Naruto was moved, and a smile stretched his lips as he reached for the stick of icicle offered back to him. Thank you, Iruka-sensei. It was the crack of dawn now. The emerging sun tinted the neighboring clouds that cradled it, like a mother would while nursing her child, a thick sheet of gold. It slowly rose up from beyond the distant horizon, as if stirred from a deep slumber. With the deity's glorious rebirth, the darkness dwindled. But Naruto couldn't say the same for the darkness manifested by his sorrow. It clung to him, like planet orbiting a star. The morning's dew still hung on the greenery, glistening, and it wasn't long before the birds commenced their soothing melody. Perhaps it was a notification for the nocturnal spices to withdraw into their homes, while for others, such as a beautiful young maiden of a certain clan, a sign to wake up and play her role. Today, she had big plans, a harmless idea born of solicitude to cheer up a certain someone. And although she had absolutely no clue as to where she would have attained the courage to do as such, was adamant about going through with it, nonetheless. 8:03 a.m. It was nothing short of a miracle that Naruto was able to fall asleep. And it wasn't a restless 5.5 hours of twisting and turning, either. The moment his eyes closed, reality fell still and silent. Fortunately, he was also spared from having any tiresome dreams or awful nightmares. He laid on his stomach, like a piece of log, quiet and motionless for these few fleeting hours. Perhaps that repulsive creature had finally devoured to its fill and left. It was soon apparent, however, that such a conclusion was merely wishful thinking, for as soon as Naruto grew more self-conscious, the demon was back, hungry and ready for more. Oh, joy! All of a sudden, to help shake off the thought, there was a low, tentative knock at the door, which characteristically spoke to the likeness that it was a female. And the fact that the intervals were far apart definitely meant this person wasn't Sakura. Roused from his stupor, Naruto lazily sat up in bed, his eyes weary and his face pale. He yawned and scratched his stomach before shuffling off the bed. When the door squawked open, he scrunched up his face at the intensity of the vibrant morning's light and saturated colors. Then his eyes widened when he noted it was Hinata standing at his doorstep. And she blushed and averted her eyes shyly, when his gaze roamed from her face to her torso and back up again. The princess was garbed in an ivory, spaghetti-strap dress with black, silky frills at the hem. The material clung to every voluptuous curve of her burnished, petite figure. She looked like an angel that had wandered to earth from heaven and lost her way. And somewhere, in the corner of his mind, Naruto knew the girl was his soul partner, his symmetrical half, his beautiful maiden, unseen, untouched, and her flavors, still a mystery. "Hi Hinata, what are you doing here?" he demanded in his surprise, his voice childish but coated in a layer of charm that made the girl's face heat. The mild scent of him from where she stood made her heart crash against her chest. The princess's lips parted, but she had lost the air in her lungs to speak. She wondered then if he had any idea how breathtaking his voice was, and the force of his eyes, however tired they may seem. Naruto-kun. She shook her head, blinking up at him. "Gu good morning." She greeted with a slight curtsy once it was possible to breathe again. She had never seen him in his pajamas before, well, not since he got older. and just the sight of that made her lose the measure of composure she took over an hour to gather this morning. Hinata. G-morning, he murmured her name while tousling the back of his head, staring at the girl with that clueless expression he wore so well. Hinata could clearly hear the erratic throbbing of her heart, and she couldn't help but wonder if that was normal or life-threatening. Soon she was unconsciously meddling with her thumbs, while the other fingers clasped the picnic basket she had in her possession. I made some breakfast, she struggled, and hoped we could have it together. She bowed her head sincerely and lifted the hamper in her hands. The fabulous material of her thigh-length dress cascaded over her buttocks in a fashion that could steal the wind from any man. Nothing's gonna happen if you keep moping around. You're not in a position to act in such a way anymore. It's the time to become the one that entrusts rather than being entrusted to. The moment Naruto frowned with little interest to the girl's humble request, he heard Shikamaru's tedious voice resound in his mind. The distressed shinobi tried to seem wholehearted now as he cast Hinata a grateful smile. Then his eyes softened somewhere between enthusiasm and grief. I would love that, he accepted. Thank you, Hinata. Please, come in. Really? The girl seemed astounded as she straightened her bend. Does that mean? Nah, Naruto-kun and I are on a... Her voice thinned and trailed off the moment she realized the notion upon her lips. She fastened her eyes shut before her crush could identify that telling gleam dwelling within them. Then she heaved a rueful smile and fanned her hand in a dismissive gesture. It's nothing. Naruto closed the door behind her. Sorry about the mess. He cupped the back of his head in embarrassment when Hinata stilled against the scowl of untidiness. I haven't really gotten around to cleaning. And his mood suddenly shifted to that of grief as he recalled the training he had undergone at Mount Mayuboku after learning of Jiraiya's death. That's okay, Naruto-kun. Hinata swayed her hand to win his attention before he could drown in an irreversible state of depression. I don't mind at all, really. Are you sure? His gaze was sharp and inquiring, but he seemed more relieved and reassured when Hinata nodded her head without hesitation. Okay, well, I'm going to take a shower. We can eat afterwards. Make yourself comfortable, I won't be long. Hinata's heart skipped a beat and her eyes widened. Fortunately, Naruto had already turned around before her expression could catch his eye and arouse his curiosity. No matter how much she suppressed, the princess couldn't resist picturing him standing in that bathroom, clad in nothing but soapsuds, with water undulating down his arms and chest and regions farther down south. Her cheeks brightened with color as she thought about sacred areas below his waist. She barely knew about the state of her, much less to think about his. The audacity. The Hyuga princess swallowed past the hot lump lodged in her throat. Under any circumstances, was it normal for a young virgin girl to have these thoughts, whenever she looked at a boy she liked a lot? She hadn't a clue. Her boy-liking history none gave her few reference points to work with. When she realized he was standing in the door leading to the other room, watching her, she stood sincerely, like an obedient schoolgirl awaiting further instructions from her esteemed lecturer. Okay, in the meantime, I will prepare the table. He gazed unswervingly before he left. His eyes were gentle but intense, and it seemed to make her bones turn soft. A second longer and she would be seeping through the cracks in the floorboard right now, like spilled milk. Naruto-kun's room. A curious Hinata sighed shakily as she studied the small space with evident admiration, taking in every bit of detail she could. I've never been inside his apartment before, unlike Sakura-san and some of the others. She took in a deep breath, filling her nose with the scent of him and, upon exhaling, made up her mind to do quick work cleaning his room. Naruto saved the village. This deed could not repay the debt. It paled in comparison, but she wanted to prove that she was extremely grateful in any way that she could. In any case, was that really the reason why she was so willing to do his chores? Did she really decide to come here today purely because she wanted to offer her condolences and gratitude? If nothing else, it was a good excuse. Hinata blew out a sigh of relief, and then rubbed her forehead with the back of her hand. Well, that ought to do it, and just in time, too. She looked around the room with evident satisfaction, smiling at her grand accomplishment. The space seemed to sparkle now as opposed to brooding earlier, as if it were thanking the princess for her effort and a job well done. The bed was perfectly spread without a crease, and the laundry neatly folded and stacked within a basket. The furniture was thoroughly polished and the carpets vacuumed. She diligently emptied the fridge of expired foods and disposed off all the garbage lying around. Finally, she opened up all the windows to let some fresh air in, and then prepared the table with the food she had made at home. A lazy squeal of an opening door signaled Naruto's arrival, and his sudden presence sent Hinata's heart crashing violently against her rib cage. "Something smells amazing," he said, sauntering casually into the room. He was wrapped in nothing but an aqua bathrobe and a cream towel around his neck. The visual was disarming, and Hinata's entire face began turning pink, rapidly. Pursing her lips coyly, the princess noted that he smelled more of soap now than his original intoxicating fragrance. Perhaps that was for the best, though she could recognize a tinge of disappointment. The chibi that was her inner goddess, on the other hand, was openly pouting. The sweet scent of soap upon his skin made her remember the image of him in the bath, garbed in nothing but suds. The thought made her eyes automatically begin to drift downward, but by God, she had to restrain herself by the time she got to his stomach. She knew danger. Her blood was electric in her veins, and her heart was galloping, like an untamed black stallion in her chest. Still, she gawked at him while sitting on her heels around the knee-length table, admiring his irresistible flair. His hair was still damp and curly from the shower, a beautiful, sleek plain the hue of honey that lay seductively over his forehead. Tendrils were everywhere, but her gaze soon drifted to his perfect lips, and then to his eyes. They were the color of the ocean, deep and filled with untold mysteries, just like the calm misty blue. The princess hunted for the answer to a particular question in them, but the sea was too vast for her to discover what she sought. Naruto-kun. She studied the broad cut of his shoulders now, and the long, strong length of his arms. He was so handsome. "Awa!" he suddenly exclaimed, disrupting Hinata's scrutiny and practically drooling at the appetizing appearance and smell of the various dishes. The combination of aromas filled the room, some seeming to take on a physical form so as to caress beneath his chin, coaxing him to sample, to dominate what he craved, and he craved everything. "Breakfast," he recalled her saying. This was more like a feast for at least 5 or more people. It was unbelievable that so much food could fit in that small picnic basket. Was there an alternate dimension in that thing? Everything looked so delicious, from the sushi, steamed rice and bread, to the miso soup, omelette, and grilled fish. And, of course, Naruto neglected everything that had his face adorned all over it, literally. The sight of that always gave him the heebie-jeebies. Heck, eating himself didn't exactly seem normal. It was downright creepy, but Hinata apparently didn't feel that way one bit. "Everything looks so amazing, Hinata." A salivating Naruto complimented candidly, his eyes never leaving the food. "Did you make all this yourself?" She nodded sheepishly, tapping the tip of her forefingers together. "I wanted to do something special for Naruto-kun." Touched, the warrior's eyes softened. She could see his appreciation. She could almost feel it. "Hinata." His lips curved beautifully. "Thank you, really. I needed this." The princess beamed at him and nodded her head, like a child who had just satisfied her taste buds on a double serving of her favorite ice cream sundae. "You're welcome." All of a sudden, Naruto looked around, flabbergasted, and then blurted out a long, high-pitched, "EHHH. My room," he stuttered as the towel fell to the ground from around his nape. And he pointed a trembling index finger in an open space that was perhaps the filthiest. "It's clean." A proud Hinata took the liberty of finishing the rickety sentence, somehow pleased by his flustered state. "I tidied the place up a bit while Naruto-kun was taking a bath." Naruto rubbed the back of his head, shamefaced, and yet a half-wide grin stretched his lips. I don't know what to say. I thought you said you didn't have a problem with it," he pondered, pouting inwardly. "Naruto-kun doesn't need to thank me," Hinata said meekly, looking down at her hands as she tried to gather and retain her decorum. I wanted to do this." Almost automatically, she pressed a curved index finger to her lips, and then glanced up at him from beneath her eyelashes. "I hope you like it." She swore she saw him blush then, but his color vanished from his cheeks so fast that she wondered if she might have imagined it. "Hinata." Naruto pronounced her name in a way he had never done before, a manner that made her skin sprung goosebumps. Was he extracting sweet vengeance? "It's amazing." His voice was low, complimentary, and almost seductive, if she didn't know any better. "You're amazing." His unexpected, velvet-like words and that captivating gleam that flashed in his eyes made her gasp, and she dropped her head before she could lose any more of her valuable composure. His gorgeous face, eyes, nose, cheeks, lips and all was such a distraction and a hazard to her poise that Hinata decided to try and not look at it any more than courtesy absolutely demanded. His sweet words were obviously more of a threat than she bargained for. Watching him secretly was a more prudent approach, if she really valued her consciousness. "Let's dig in," Naruto said when he was certain she would not reply. Heck, even Sai could have easily pointed out that the girl was highly sensitive to his words. She was excessively shy, especially when the one she admired was in close proximity. Let's. Itadakimasu," Naruto said melodiously when he had plopped himself down on a cushion, crossed-legged. He quickly reached for his chopsticks, and then detached the pair while making some blissful sound with a watery mouth. Our hero made haste to sample everything from each dish, evidently chewing less than the appropriate number of times the doctor ordered. He indulged his taste buds with everything except, of course, the menus that had an overly cute art of his face depicted on it. But, alas, it soon became apparent that he might succumb to temptation. He couldn't help it. There was a shortage of pastries and Hinata just had an innate talent for making them. They were absolutely delectable. It was a recipe with an obsessive flavor, which guaranteed the young maiden absolute possession of his very soul. Her inner goddess smirked, rubbing her hands together ominously at the truth of that. Naruto's belly twitched in contentment as he sucked everything down like a vacuum cleaner. The food was scrumptious, and God knows he would have French-kissed his 10 fingers, if Hinata wasn't here, despite the fact that no form of food was smeared on them. He may as well do it, since he might have already showed the girl that gluttonous persona he wanted to conceal. "Have as much as you'd like," Hinata informed in veneration, having already ate to her fill. Now, she watched him, watched in love and affection as he enjoyed her personal home cooking. Wait, what? Love and affection? She blushed fiercely and averted her face upon realization of her open emotions. "Thanks, I will. Everything tastes so good. You'll make a great wife one day, Hinata." Naruto didn't look up when he said those words, and maybe it was a good thing that he hadn't. But the open remark still made Hinata's face heat. And she almost said his name in response on a tone that was everything but decent. She may have stifled the amorous moaning of his name, but a breath still escaped her lips, one that had enough wind to capture our warrior's undivided attention. Naruto stopped and arched one brow in question. His soft, sky-like eyes were appraising even as noodles extend from his mouth to the bowel. Seriously, I really love your cooking, he mumbled with his mouth full, and then like a noisy vacuum cleaner, soused the rest of the noodles into his mouth and started chomping away. The sheer sound and sight had Hinata's lips parting in a sultry fashion. But the noodles were not what interested her. That certainly was not what she craved, not in the least. Her heart throbbed as further thoughts invaded her mind, but not just her heart, never just her heart when he was so close to her. This wasn't the first or second time that Hinata felt this strange sensation, this strong and consistent convulsion below her waist. And it always seemed to occur while she was in Naruto's company for an extended period, alone. For some inexplicable reason, she wanted him to put his hands on her. She wanted to be touched, everywhere. Hinata once thought that a simple hug may have sufficed, but it was becoming increasingly clearer that it would not. Was it appropriate to think or feel this way? The princess soon got a hold of herself and addressed his latest commentary with a remark that was hardly audible. She wondered what her face looked like, and tried unsuccessfully to relax. But the electric current that seemed to be originating from somewhere in his body never slacked. Occasionally, the princess would permit herself a quick glance in his direction. But he was too caught up in eating to realize. It was a wonderful treat. As if caught in a food-borne trance, Naruto reached out to retrieve a saucer with jelly-stuffed rice balls. The sudden proximity of his long fingers to her hand sent her heart into frenzied palpitations. Hinata struggled to keep her face composed, though her cheeks brightened with color. The corners of Naruto's lips pulled up into a crooked smile, stopping her breath in her heart now before he bit down into a rice ball in hand. Delight spread over his face as the cloud-like filling melted in his mouth. And his facial expression almost seemed like an invitation to lean forward, despite the nerve-wracking shyness, and pinch away the grains of sticky rice that smeared the corner of his mouth, one by one. Hinata battled valiantly to fight off the urge, for she knew any level of contact she had with him could possibly have her bursting into flames, lustful, all-consuming flames that would be nigh impossible to extinguish once they had ignited. The princess felt a profusion of emotions: excitement, confusion, sadness, frustration, and even a tinge of anger, because to this day, she was certain she completely knew herself and had achieved almost full control over her body through intense training and meditation. Yet, at this very moment, she was struggling to steady the reins of her control, to subdue her rising desire. It was consuming her rationality. "I'm sorry about Jiraiya-sama," Hinata suddenly blurted out, showing no hesitation in wanting to offer her deepest condolences, or rather, to change her chain of thought. Initially, she did not intend to speak of the man. Yet, it was either she change the energy in the room or do something very stupid and nigh unforgivable. Like she figured, an unsavory sacrifice, the spark in the atmosphere shifted. A knife pierced her lust, but her heart was run through, as well. She could only imagine what Naruto felt, and her chest tightened in guilt at the thought. Now it was a battle to hold back her tears. There was an awkward, prolonged moment of silence. The princess could feel the thick waves of depression rolling off him, and she could think of nothing to say. "Hinata, it's fine," he finally said after a while, failing miserably at sounding wholehearted and unscathed, assuming that was his intention. She glanced up at him with evident contrition, but he was staring into his bowl of soup, his eyebrows pulling together. "It's no big deal. I'm all right now. Someone told me that Ero Sennin believed I was the only one who was going to inherit his will of fire, that in his mind, he had no doubt about my becoming a great Hokage. I don't think he'll continue to praise me, if I go on swallowing in depression." As he spoke, the dejected edge left his voice and color returned to his pale face. "I have a mission left behind by Ero Sennin, so I don't have any time to be moping around. I need to get stronger if I hope to bring to fruition, not only my sensei's dream, but mine, as well. Also," his eyes narrowed in determination, I haven't given up on Sasuke. Hinata's mood seemed to change in that instant, particularly at the key words moping around. It shifted to something around the lines of indignation, a level of indignation that obviously outweighed the fact that she was probably being a tad selfish and insensitive. Of course, she was impressed. Of course, she was proud. But she felt neglected and upset for the most part. She wanted him to share his burdens and the pleasures of his achievements. She wanted to be recognized. She wanted to know what he thought of her existence. She wanted to be his, through everything. In the spur of the moment, Hinata was suddenly headstrong, adamant to learn of Naruto's feelings toward her, whether or not they would bring her absolute disappointment and grief or immeasurable happiness and satisfaction. It occurred to her then that, perhaps that point in time, when she had confessed her love to him on the battlefield, should remain lost in the flow of time, if he did not feel the same level of affection she did for him. Naruto-kun. His name was hot upon her lips, and she averted her eyes, just her eyes, as a precaution to preserve the little confidence she had mustered. What? She hesitated, dropping her eyes. What do you think of me? Do you think I'm pretty? Her words were hardly above a whisper as she tried to mask the note of petulance in her voice. They were so low that she had a hard time hearing them over the loud thrashing of her own heart, and that made her wonder if he could, either. A sudden flash of surprise over his face answered her question. Their gaze met and lingered, and the silence deepened, and changed. Flickers of the electricity she had felt moments past began to charge the atmosphere once more as he gazed unrelentingly in her eyes. It wasn't until her head started to swim did Hinata realize she wasn't breathing. When she drew in a jagged breath, breaking the stillness, she averted her eyes again, a fierce flush staining plump cheeks. But was embarrassment really the emotion she was supposed to be feeling? Was it not despair and sorrow? Naruto's hesitation gave root to speculation, and Hinata held fast to the notion that the fleeing gleams she spied in his eyes were supposedly of uncertainty, pity, and disgust. In other words, her love was unrequited, and the chibi of her subconscious stood dumbfounded by the horrid revelation. Abruptly, Naruto averted his gaze, his eyes guarded, and Hinata bit her lip and was glad he couldn't know just how much that hurt. It was better that way. He had enough anguish to deal with as is. His ordeals over these few months have been harsh and unrelenting. The princess hadn't realized the moisture in her eyes had spilled over. She quickly rubbed the back of her hand across her flushed cheek, and sure enough, traitor tears were there, betraying her. Naruto frowned, heartbroken when he spied her tears. His facial expression was of agony, as though he had been impaled by a samurai's sword. "Hi Hinata," he called, but was almost immediately cut off. "Do you remember what I said before I fought pain?" The question made her heart clench despite her solemn visage. And Naruto gasped in response, the inquiry evoking that not-so-distant memory. Pain held his hand forward, intent visible in those calm yet sinister eyes. They were deep, cold, and sad, a void filled with malicious ambitions and chaotic ideologies. "It's time for you to come with me," the demigod said, towering over the sage like a bad omen in his black robes. Naruto gasped, prostrate and bounded there on the barren ground by the man's black iron rods. The demon's pupils enlarged in preparations for his next heinous move, but, just then, quick footsteps pierced the tension that had formed between the two. Time seemed to slow to the moment when Hinata leapt into a high arch, capturing the Titan's inquisitive gaze. She attacked the villain upon her descent, missing her mark, her assault creating a large crater beneath her. How horrible, she thought mentally once the dust had cleared. She looked to her comrade in distress, and then back to her adversary. Naruto-kun's movements are sealed away due to those rods. I won't let you lay a finger on Naruto-kun. Reinforcements, Pain assumed, sporting that ever-composed countenance. Why did you come here? Naruto demanded urgently, obviously not enthused in the least. Hurry up. Run. You don't stand a chance against him. The beautiful maiden made some sound, something matching a breath of protest. I know that I'm being selfish, she admitted in a subtle tone. What are you talking about? Naruto was frantic. You don't need to be here. It's too dangerous. I stand here on my will alone. She remembered a scene from the past, when an adult of her clan was carrying her off, after Naruto had saved her from a group of bullies. This time, I will save you. I've always been a crybaby and always just gave up before trying. I kept thinking everything I did was wrong, but you showed me the right path to take, Naruto-kun. I've always been chasing you. I always wanted to catch up to you, to walk with you, to be with you. You changed me, Naruto-kun, your smile saved me. That's why I'm not afraid to die protecting you, because I love you, Naruto-kun. Slowly, his eyes glum, Naruto lowered his head which, in Hinata's opinion, seemed like a gesture stating the fact that he could not bear the weight of the world and her feelings for him at the same time. The child of prophecy of which the great Toad Sage spoke, could not have a family while the world was hinged on the brink of destruction. But needless to say, Hinata was willing to wait. Hinata. Naruto's eyes darkened with many emotions, but of those, she could not perceive. His oceanic gaze was filled with mystery, a bottomless sea of enigma that she could not decipher, even with the power of her eyes. It's nothing. She gushed while shaking risen hands in dismissal. You don't have to think about that. Forget what I said. Oh, that's right. She looked to the corner of the room and got up to fetch whatever it is she had placed there. Hinata stood with care, worried her balance might have been affected by the tinge of electricity that still ran throughout her body. She walked across the room, light-headed and wobbly. By this point, she was obstinate that her endeavor to change the subject had prevailed. Though, hadn't she resolved to abstain from reminding him of her confession on the battlefield? Well, so much for that resolve. I baked you a cake, as a means of officially thanking you for protecting me. She smiled, as high-spirited as possible. Pain might have realized I was still alive, if you hadn't started fighting with him again. Nervousness continued to play over Hinata's body, like the wind through a rolling meadow of beautiful but delicate flowers. It almost crippled her, making it harder to breathe, harder to think, and even harder to maintain her sincere facial expression. Her indignation and sadness were gone, like large volumes of liquid being exposed to temperatures far below 0 degrees, replacing it with massive glaciers of embarrassment. While making her way across the room, back toward the table, Hinata toppled in her clumsy state and Naruto stood, hoping to save her, only to have a flying cake plaster all over his unsuspecting crotch. Super. Cakey cake. Oh crap. Naruto exclaimed, dumbfounded. Naruto-kun. Hinata's eyes went wide with horror, her forehead red from its impact to the floor. Forgive me. She apologized immediately, and then made haste to fetch a dishcloth, after scraping herself up off the floor. Kneeling before him, the young maiden did her best to wipe the chunk of calorie away. But, unfortunately, that's not all she was wiping away. She was erasing the thick beams that supported his composure, his rationality, and his will to resist falling prone to temptation and having his way with her as desire specifically commanded. All the while thinking a girl had never before touched him in this way. Naruto's body went taut, his fingers stiffened, and his toes curled. There was not a word upon his lips. He couldn't find his tongue, and it wasn't long before he got a rather demanding erection, hard-forged steel. Before Hinata could reach down to fetch another clean cloth, her eyes repentant and cute, his vessel began tapping her forehead each time he throbbed. For a second that seemed to stretch through to infinity, the princess's heart and breathing stopped. It was as if she was caught in a momentary state of suspended animation, and it wasn't long before a bright layer of pink rose from her collarbones all the way up to the crown of her head, like a tide that was embarrassment. What is this? What's this hard, warm thing from Naruto-kun on my forehead? She thought absently. Then she gasped, her eyes widening when she finally understood just what exactly she had done to him. She had broken something. She had unintentionally mutilated H's body somehow, and she would never be forgiven for it. With an incoherent flurry of words, Hinata stood awkwardly, trips over her own feet again, and falls against him. They both tumbled to the floor, her on top, and she could distinctly feel what she had done to him on her thigh, throbbing like an erratic heartbeat. Naruto's once passive and morose aura was flaring by a rush of adrenaline now. Words couldn't possibly explain what had become of Hinata's, but the fact that she had broken into a sweat meant that it was nothing less than overwhelming. Her sensitive chest was fast against the hardness of his, and she was already pulsing between her legs, almost violently, a level of awareness that was completely new to her. She didn't know what to think of it, but her body knew well what it yearned. Though, did she possess the mental fortitude to dispose herself to its needs? Naruto's eyes were as wide as Hinata's, filled with shock, but hers soon half-lidded with something else as desire rooted even deeper into her core. Desire was not all she felt. However, there was a tight grip of guilt in the pit of her stomach. She had done something very awful to her darling prince, and yet, he did not whimper nor writhe in pain. There wasn't even as much as a pained look on his face. Instead, behind the evident spell of shock in his eyes, it would seem he was as lustful as she was. Now, the maiden was as confused as she was aroused, and she propped herself up on her arms. Time seemed to slow to this moment. Naruto could hear the dangerous pace of Hinata's heartbeat, and her breaths came quicker through parted lips, a sweet, warm breeze against his face. He could smell the fragrance of the shampoo in her hair, the soap upon her skin, and the freshness of her clothes. Tresses of hair branched off along either side of her face, her beautiful eyes obscured by the shadow cast by her bang. Naruto then noted her rosy cheeks and, at the same time, examined and relished in the feel of her soft, warm body against his. Below the tempting curve of her lips, he allowed his eyes to journey from the hollow of her chin, along the slender length of her throat, to the threshold of your enticing cleavage. Her breasts were soft, smooth, and creamy, he assumed, merely by a brief glacé. And it proved most difficult to tear his eyes away. Every fiber of his being wanted to feel and taste them, and he knew it would only become harder to resist with time. Every passing second, however embarrassing, was a gift, a new experience and feeling for them both to savor. And they delighted in its taste, grace, and glory, never wanting to move, loathing the idea of this moment's inevitable end. Finally, Naruto's gaze shifted and settled on Hinata's unpainted lips. They were enticing, and he couldn't help but note that they were thinner in comparison to his. They were thin but attracted, making him wonder about their unique taste. Unable to help himself, Naruto flashed a glacé at her breasts again. Hinata's were by far larger than Sakura's, and he proceeded to think how they would feel and fit in his hands. A passionate light lit in her eyes. The princess slowly lowered her head, locks of her hair caressing her prince's cheeks, and licked the icing from the tip of his nose. It tickled, but the sensation made Naruto throb rigidly in response, nonetheless. And not only a few times, either. Motivated by her decision in this, automatically, intuitively, the young sage lifted his head. He watched as her eyes drifted close before he could lightly touch her chin with his lips. Her eyelids twitched, but her eyes remained close, as if there was something more, something special and in particular, that she was expecting him to do. He knew just what she was silently requesting. The truth of it rippled through her to him, like a warm tide, and the idea lingered at the tip of his mind, coaxing him to proceed with much passion. Without a moment's more thought, he closed his eyes and gently brushed his mouth against her trembling lower lip. It felt like a soft, warm cloud beneath his, and as brief as it was, spectacular couldn't even begin to describe the level of pleasure he derived in that fleeting instant. As for Hinata, her entire body trembled in response, and her nipples ripened against the wall of his chest. If her mind told her this was wrong, then why did her body say otherwise, and which one was she to heed? Gradually, she reopened her eyes when his head met the floor once more. And, after muttering a word of apology, she neared her face to his so that she could brush his lips in an echo of his feet, sampling his flavor again. Their hearts drummed together. Naruto-kun's lips are on mine, she beamed inwardly. My first kiss. When the maiden's eyes reopened, once she had raised her head, Naruto studied her face carefully. It was strange that he had never looked at Hinata in a different light until today. The girl was beautiful. She had a slightly round, childish face, plump cheeks, and her silky hair was like a moonless night sky. Her eyes were innocent, deep and gorgeous, but troubled. He could note the twinkle of sadness that dwelled within those mesmerizing depths. Displeased with the blemish that tainted what he thought was the epitome of beauty and grace, Naruto decided to relinquish this measure of unhappiness. And with that, his warm, velvet-like lips were pressing very softly against hers, a promise, a wish, and a resolution. But, what neither one of them was prepared for was her response. Blood sizzled under Hinata's pale skin, gushed throughout her veins, and burned in her lips as they crushed his. Her breath came in a wild, telling gasp, and her tiny fingers clasped the collars of his bathrobe, clutching him to her. Her lips parted and her throat went dry, as she breathed in his intoxicating scent. "Hi Hinata," Naruto muttered breathlessly when their lips were separated, and she was finally able to yank back on the reins of her control. "Is this all right?" he asked slowly, weighing her reaction. "Yes," she nodded her head, like a toddler that had secretly done a bad deed. She took her time to steady her shaky breaths, even though she had began, almost instinctively, rubbing her center along the surface of his bent leg. I love you. So long as it's you, Naruto-kun, it will be okay." Hinata. He kept his face perfectly composed, though a peculiar gleam lit in his eyes, a soft light that Hinata apparently deemed less a threat in her state of arousal. Naruto could distinctly feel the smoothness of her hindquarters, moving up and down his bare thigh. Her slow and sinuous movements, not to mention the heat between her legs, proved unbelievably arousing. It made his erection greater. And, all the while, he could sense that she was getting wetter. Between secretly binge-reading adult magazines and being forced to proofread Jiraiya's novels, Naruto knew exactly what the moisture between her legs meant. "Why did you apologize before?" His voice was low and repentant. Hinata wondered what he could possibly be sorry for. Her curiosity rooted deep, despite her craving. But, more importantly, it was better to focus on gathering her bearings to answer his question, his embarrassing question, his heart-racking inquiry. God give her strength. She hesitated, averting her gaze. "I did something to hurt Naruto-kun." Her words, no more than a whisper, coincided with a strong pulsation of his masculine package. Her cheeks were scarlet when she glanced down in a telling gesture to where the bulge poked her thigh. Then she met his curious gaze anew. It didn't take long for Naruto to understand what she meant. And he looked down as if the girl was transparent, as if he could see past her creamy cleavage to his pulsing pride. He reclaimed her eyes. "Hinata, it's really not what you think." He tried to stifle a smile of amusement, though his lips still twitched. "What do you mean?" Was she really going to make him spell it out for her? "What you did, what you feel." He looked down again, as actually my. "Na Naruto-kun's," Hinata repeated casually, evidently confused and unaware of what she just blatantly repeated. Naruto smiled, finding the girl's ignorance in this to be quite adorable and amusing. He liked the fact that, in a sense, she was as naive as he was. And her shyness made him more relaxed and, well, creative. It means that I'm aroused. Her brows still slightly creased in uncertainty. It means that I find you incredibly attractive, that I like you a whole lot and I want you to be mine. Hinata, I want to make love to you. Crash. Hinata's composure crumbled, shattered, like a sheet of glass against hard, jagged rocks. She could but hear the strident sound as the pane of glass scattered into 1,000 glittering fragments beneath the weight of his words, and she was certain he wouldn't have given her the time to recover the pieces. Naruto smiled his breathtaking smile again, stretching those perfect lips. And Hinata's eyes propped wide open as she continued to process his confession. Like an old engine, far past its prime, her heart slowed to a stall before pulsating, roaring back to life with newly found vigor. Her pulse was erratic, and she could feel her blood heating to a dangerous boil. Her temperature rose, her body overheating. Just before her fever rose above the critical point, to seize, like a cold-hearted pirate, her consciousness, Naruto started to fondle her breasts with curious but gentle hands. Hinata responded, almost instantaneously, her eyes tightly closed, her forehead creased with lines of delight. And her lips pursed, and then parted on a sweet breath. Naruto had only dreamt of moments like this, another craving listed in his super-duper long list of Uzumaki's boyish desires. He had always thought Sakura's breasts would be his first. But, then again, he wouldn't want what happened to Jiraiya many years ago, courtesy of Tsunade, to happen to him. Beaten to a bloody pulp because of peeping or groping seemed a bit too harsh a punishment, if you ask me. Just the thought gave him the shivers. Hinata didn't seem to have a problem being fondled. She squirmed in satisfaction on top of him. If anything, she wanted more. Her breasts were warm and plush beneath her dress. They filled his hands completely, and she made some low, provocative sound beneath her breath as he further indulged himself in this childish fantasy. His sensual caress soon made her begin to feel a more consistent series of pulsations deep within her core, more potent than before. And she was getting wetter, if that was even possible. She could feel it. For some reason, it made her more self-conscious and embarrassed. Abruptly, the princess sprang to her feet from the temptingly soft yet firm, warm, and masculine surface that was his chest. She gazed at his attractive figure through apprehensive eyes. He was the embodiment of ecstasy and irresistibility, sent by Cupid with a dark, delicious goal. He was a creature no girl could possibly resist, a threat. He was no threat to her, however. She wanted him to make love to her. After all, it was she who, well, made him erect. Even if it was just a mere coincidence. And she didn't regret any of it. Naruto's white teeth flashed brilliantly as he endeavored to subdue another smile of amusement. He gradually sat upright, his eyes calm yet seductive. "Oh, that's right," he said, stealing her breath for the 100th time. "I never told you what I think." What Naruto-kun thinks?" she asked slowly, her arms hugging her breasts, as if protecting them from his hungry eyes. He nodded his head, his eyes smoldering. "You're very beautiful, Hinata. And I think your dress looks great on you." Her eyes went wide with surprise. And she lowered her head when she noted he was studying her face, seemingly pleased with himself. Nah, Naruto-kun. I'm not beautiful," she disagreed. "And my dress is just, well, decent, not great." That's what she said, and yet she blushed with pleasure at his compliment. Fluently, like the graceful flow of water, Naruto rose to his feet and hovered toward her. She flinched, but she did not move away. He reached out to touch his fingertips to her cheek, and shivers slithered up her spine. His expression was unfathomable, but soon, she realized a tinge of sadness lining his handsome face. Hinata, I admit that sometimes I tend to sugarcoat what I say, but I would never lie to you. Your dress suits you perfectly, and you're unbelievably beautiful. Butterflies fluttered in her stomach as his knuckles gently stroked her cheek. And you're wrong, he whispered in her ear, after skimming his lip over her ear-lobe. You're totally indecent. No one should look so divine, so tempting. It's not fair. Hinata's eyes were wide. Again, her chest tightening, but she couldn't look away, his eyes imprisoned hers. She could feel the heat of his body intermingling with hers, the convergence making her feel the truth of his words. And her legs got weak, her panting breaths, louder. Tempting. How? She thought to herself mentally, looking to her subconscious for answers. Clueless, the chibi started whistling with hands behind her back and looked anywhere but at Hinata. Her inner goddess, on the other hand, was busy massaging her beasts, trying to replicate the same level of gratification derived from Naruto's godlike hands. Without a word, our golden knight pressed his warm lips delicately to her forehead, and the room spun. Her body was highly aware of his presence and his need, and that made it impossible to think. Shall I explain how you're tempting me? He offered sweetly, his eyes still amused. It was clearly a rhetorical question, she surmised, spying his fairly pronounced collarbones through the loose-fitting garment. His fingers traced slowly down the slender column that was her spine. Her hands were limp on his chest, and she felt lightheaded again, fierce pulsations up north and down south. She knew she had fallen into dangerous borders, but she couldn't tell him to stop. However irrational it was, she wanted to tell him more, and even more after that. The princess began hyperventilating by the time Naruto tilted her head slowly and touched his warm lips to hers for the second time, shicking, savoring them lightly. Heat and delight filled her, permeating throughout her body in a fierce and unrelenting storm. Her loins quaked under the force of her growing frustration, her muscles taut. And then she collapsed. Hinata. Naruto's voice was alarmed as he caught by the waist, holding her up. Are you all right? Say something. The princess only heard the dull echoing of a gradually diminishing murmur before her vision blurred and her eyes drifted close. But, just before that final thread snapped, which held her mind and senses to reality, she not only found the mass that was her body braced fast against the wall, but both her tiny hands that were laced with that of his. For a very brief moment, she noted the difference in size between his hands and her own. His aura surged then, flowing into her body, like a powerful counter to a sedative drug. Her eyes popped open and, she drew in a breath, as though she had just resurfaced after being submerged underwater for far too long. Overwhelming, intoxicated, revitalized, a few words to describe what she felt. It was as if he had breathed new life into her. His energy, almost divine and sensual, was like the hand of pleasure. It touched her body, like a physical caress, coaxing her desire to an even fiercer boil. And she began panting softly in response. Awareness centered at the point between her thighs where his legs squeezed, and his face buried in her neck. His breaths were hot on her skin, and her lips parted on a dark moan. She felt a primeval urge to coil her arms around him, but they were still hoisted and pinned against the wall. Naruto-kun, she struggled between heavy breathing. Be gentle, her voice was just high enough for him to hear. I can feel Naruto-kun's leg bracing against this is so very embarrassing. But, it feels good. She may have told him to be gentle, but Hinata found the way he handled her to be incredibly erotic, unusual, but erotic. She hoped he wouldn't release her, not yet. Shish. Hinata. He rests an index finger over her lips in a graceful gesture that made her breath catch. I need you to trust me. Allow me to make you feel. Let's see if all the time I spent proofreading Ero Sennin's perverted manuscripts paid off. I still remember most of the chapters from Ika Ika Tactics. Hinata showed no signs of resistance, but arousal and impatience was plain upon the maiden's face. It was evident in the glitter of her eyes and the arch of her fine brows, the flush that kissed her cheeks and the curve of her beautiful lips. It was especially clear by the way she would glance at him before averting her gaze. Naruto found pleasure in the way she breathed through parted lips. He cupped her face, urging the girl to look up at the warrior that slightly towered over her. He was so very strong yet humble, sensitive but resilient, and very beautiful. She still could not unravel the mysteries she saw in the deepest depths of his eyes, but she could tell from their steady glow what would come next. Clasping her hands together with one of his own now, slowly, Naruto skimmed the back of his fingers over her shoulder, down her armpit, and back up again. Hinata quivered, but her eyes were still on his, trapped by the intensity of his telling gaze. Sheepishly, she turned her face to the side, her heart pounding out of control as he combed locks of hair behind her ear. Then he used a single finger to tilt her chin, aligning her face with his once more. He kissed her forehead tenderly before lightly pressing his warm lips against hers. The room didn't spin this time, but she shuddered with need and released a breath of desire when he pulled away. Every so often, Hinata could feel the tension building between her legs. Her clothes confided her, and it was becoming uncomfortable. She needed to be. Again, she felt the need to tell him more, but she couldn't find her tongue to utter such a demand. "Allow me to make you feel." The words echoed in her mind, making her throat parched. She wanted him to completely have his way. She was certain he was curious and needy as much as she was, and she wanted him to explore and proceed at his own pace. She wanted him to grant her pleasure of his own free will. She wanted to be possessed, loved, and marked by him. Like a barren terrain, blessed with a light drizzle of rain for the very first time, was how it felt as Naruto skimmed his bottom lip across the fullness of hers. Hinata's lips were dry, and he made the journey again, but this time, with his tongue. The princess sighed in her delight, and the moment her lips parted, he instinctively dipped his tongue inside of her mouth. It waged a frivolous war with hers, and yet still reigned champion. Hinata whimpered in indignation when he withdrew his tongue. She had absolutely no idea a kiss could be done like that, not that she had ever been kissed before now. She hadn't a clue what it was called, but she was certain she liked it. She liked how his tongue glided tenderly over her quivering lips. She especially pleasured the way he plunged inside her mouth and probed her shy tongue with his. She needed to feel that again. His breath was suddenly hot on her neck again, and then her ear before Naruto spied the pert peaks of her nipples protruding through her dress. Arrogantly, he wondered if he was the one responsible for stimulating them to such hard peaks. After a careful appraisal, he noticed she wasn't wearing a bra. The revelation made his eyes blink wide open, and a smile tugged at his lips. "Hinata," he said softly, letting her hands down. She noted the tone of awkwardness in his voice, and was surprised to find a steady blush in his cheeks. It was normally so elusive. "Can I take your dress off?" The final set of words, after the long pause, just rolled off his tongue, hearty, seductive, and frank. They resounded in Hinata's mind, making her melt faster than she would have liked. The princess was dumbfounded, and her entire face turned pink in response to her beloved's intimate request. But why was her heart beating so fast? That's right, a male had never seen her before. And, in recent years, even the female servants who usually bathed her as a child. Since Hinata was struck by puberty, no one except her knew the changes her body had undergone. Looking down at her bosom, the reality of wearing no bra beneath her dress crossed her mind. It was embarrassing, and yet, somewhere, in the corner of her mind, shrouded in darkness, was she perhaps expecting this to happen? To an extent, was she hoping to entice him with her body? She didn't want to believe that, but the fact that her bra was absent did well to make her wonder. As she stewed over his request, Hinata's entire body felt sensitive and unusual. She felt afraid to reveal to Naruto what she could not fathom herself. What if he found her womanly features bizarre? What if he did not approve? Personally, she thought the changes in her body came far too soon. She could feel that chemical reaction deep inside, a place where she had always been afraid to tread. It was getting wetter. What exactly did it mean? It was getting dirty, she thought, and her inner goddess couldn't help but heave a mocking smile at her sheer naivete. Hinata. Naruto's voice was more composed. I need you to completely trust in me. Don't think so much, he reassured. I won't hurt you, Naruto-kun. She beamed at the certitude in his words. I trust you. I think your entire body is beautiful. And I'll make you feel in ways that you've never felt before. She murmured his name with curled fingers at her lips, subservience evident her in tone of voice. She dropped her gaze, tempted to look up at his face anew as she struggled to construct a coherent sentence with her words. I want Naruto-kun to make me feel, only Naruto-kun. Your wish is my command, he whispered sincerely as he cupped her chin and gently moved his thumb along the soft, luscious length of her bottom lip. First, having made some space between them, the young romancer did quick work to somewhat loosen the thin black laces at the front of her dress. And with a deliberation that the deed did not demand, eased the weight of both frilled straps farther down the maiden's biceps. Hinata's face was hot, her fists clenched, and she stood motionless, only seeming to sway as Naruto continued working on loosening her stubborn laces. Her eyes were wide but willing all the while, and she studied him inconspicuously, her heart and nerves humming in unison when she spied a bulge below his waist. She swore she saw it move at one point. Soon, and well before Hinata could gather any gauge of composure, the neck of her silky attire was easing over the curves of her bosom as Naruto pulled down. Upon attaining their freedom, her breasts bounced upward from the downward pull of her garb. He watched in captivation as those magnificent figures gradually sank and then rose. They danced, they teased, coaxing him to hold and feel them, but he didn't, not yet. The instant her dress puddled around her feet, Hinata felt lightheaded. Her limbs grew weak as she felt the intensity with which Naruto admired and studied her unclothed body, his eyes never seeming to leave the ripened fruits that were her nipples. Reality suddenly grew dark, and her prince grew distant, his hand unable to reach her. Surfacing from the depths of deep unconsciousness to a light stupor, Hinata was soon roused awake at the feeling of a cool breeze whipping across her heated skin. The countenance she wore upon her face looked more like arousal than that of disorientation, and when her eyes slightly opened and her lips parted, that claim seemed more distant from question. Lying on her back, the girl looked like a desperate, submissive princess that had long awaited for her charming prince to warm her bed, sampling, savoring everything that she had to offer. Her hands folded into cute little fists over her head, and her hair rested beneath her back, like layer of blanket, long, attractive, and sleek. Sparkling tears of joy tipped the corners of her slitted eyes at the thought of resting where her beloved slept every night. And she slowly leaned her head to the side so that she could look at him with an expression declaring everything that I am is yours for the taking. All of a sudden, she made a face, probably remembering earlier, when he turned the overwhelming force of his eyes on her. Or perhaps she felt ashamed that she fainted. Whatever the case, she was suddenly hyperaware that Naruto was standing less than an inch away from her. She was stunned by the unexpected electricity that zipped through her, astounded that it was possible to be more aware of him than she already was. "How are you feeling?" he asked in an angelic tone, standing at the side of the bed, fanning her still. The young maiden said nothing, but looked up at his face which seemed to glow in the sun's stream of light. Golden downy hair still lay on his forehead, hypnotic eyes set deep above the high planes of his cheekbones. He was so very handsome and mature, but she could note a hint of childish roundness left in the curves of his cheeks and around his chin. The mixture was lovely, and was another feature that stole her breath away. Through a pulse of sheer desire, the emotional princess raised her hand. Hesitantly, ever nervous and afraid, even now after he had fondled her chest and aroused her, that he would disappear like a mirage, too amazing to be real, hesitantly, Hinata reached up with one finger and stroked the damp length of one sideburn. She prolonged her journey until the back of her fingers were skimming over his cheekbone. His face was warm, but she barely noticed, as touching it was something she dreamed of constantly since the very first time she discovered she was in love with him. "I'm okay," she finally said. Her voice, a mere whisper, was as soft as silk. "You gave me a bit of a scare there." His perfect lips folded beautifully over his teeth, and he placed his hand over hers, even as their eyes locked. Hinata smiled, her eyes apologetic, but she was still dazed. Her gaze moved, shifting from the bathrobe he had covered her body with to his unconcealed torso. His skin was beautiful, silky and russet-colored, and his chest. She studied that hard plane, recalling all the sensations and emotions she felt when her breasts and nipples were bracing against that wonderful surface. She studied the uneven terrain down south that was his abs, noting the 4-year difference in those hard lines pronouncing his muscles. Hinata felt her breathing gradually creeping toward hyperventilation as carnal thoughts took up residence in her mind. She felt an unusual urge to physically examine and compare his nipples with hers. She wanted to kiss everywhere her fingers trod, but such a bold feat was simply out of her league still. Noting how she rubbed and squeezed her thighs together was more than enough to make Naruto erect again. And it didn't take more than one shy but loving gaze before he disposed himself to her silent wish, an epic quest to slake her desires. The princess may have been unconscious for these 10 minutes, but it would seem as though her arousal had grown rather than dwindled. Naruto could feel her energy, potent and overwhelming in its gnawing need. It was unlike any other aura he had felt before. It was glorious, compelling, exhilarating, and then some. Holding her hand still, an angel smile brightening his expression, Naruto lowered his head with evident purpose. It enshrouded Hinata's beautiful face in a shadow, but she closed her eyes slowly and welcomed his lips. He savored those soft, sweet surfaces, loving, putting to memory her unique taste, and yet, curious to know the color of her nipples once more. He wanted to taste them. He was anxious to nibble, nip and squeeze, another one of his boyish desires. Abruptly, Naruto chucked the paper fan beneath his bed, so as to use that free hand to pull the robe from her small, petite body. His fingers brushed the top of one as he did, and Hinata's body shuddered, eyes ever widening, when he dismissed his kiss. He marveled again at the perfect texture of her snow-white skin. It was satin smooth and as warm as the heat from a smithy's hearth. It felt as though her body was reeling him in, and the sight of her perky bosom slowly deteriorated his patience but not his resolve. There was something about her cleavage, some unfathomable and irresistible energy. Perhaps it was how ideal the spacing between her breasts were, and how they kissed, maybe. Whatever the case, they made him ridiculously stimulated. When Hinata righted herself again, liberated from the petrifying binds of embarrassment that had her arms in cuffs and her legs in shackles, she cupped his nape and pulled him close so that she could capture his lips with hers. Awareness caressed her chest and her entire body flushed. Heat settled in her breasts and the peak of her nipples. When she freed him, though, his head remained perfectly still, his eyes bright and steady, Hinata started to wonder. If the robe was used to cover his body, then what was left to conceal his? She felt less embarrassment using that unfamiliar word, but her face was still as red as a rose. "You're so beautiful, Hinata. All of you," Naruto flattered as he progressed closer, having slung the weight of himself on the bed, over her, while propped up on his elbows. Hinata was flustered, only witnessing a blur when he threw himself, like a rag doll, between her legs. Something hard, warm, and alive caught her attention. It was pressing against her lips down south, squeezing those swollen cheeks each time it throbbed. The princess pursed her lips and dropped her head on the pillow, delight creasing her forehead. Her cute little nipples were swollen yet tight, their pink-tipped peaks the shape of a child's mouth. Naruto slowly, gently, kissed the silky flesh atop one of those lovely skyscrapers before closing his mouth over her, and she arched against him with a cry. Her hands locked his head in place. Her beast filled his hand, and her hip bumped against his erection, which nigh killed his patience. When he cupped and twisted her nipple with a free hand, she heaved a broken gasp. Then he pulled and pushed that stiff peak inward and she reclined her head, revealing her neck to him. Naruto was uncertain whether or not this was another sweet invitation, but he accepted. He kissed and licked the rim of her ear and its lobe, her throat, and the smooth curve at the crest of her shoulder. He tasted the hollows around her collarbone and ran his tongue across her sweetly scented skin. He let his lips linger on the flutter of her pulse, reassured that she responded to his caress. The sage started savoring again, more deeply than before. His lips were on one Brea Saint, one nipple, with his fingers matching the movements on the other. As he stroked and shicked and licked, Hinata ran her fingers through his hair, as if trying to slow his pace while she tried to remember how to breathe. It was perfect, she thought, her head falling back once more. With each tug on her nipples, she felt an answering contraction between her thighs, almost violently. As pleasurable as his touch was, Hinata always wanted more. She needed to be, her legs spread, him between them. She was frustrated, immensely. She needed a release, but was uncertain as to how he would deliver. "I love your, and the taste of your nipples," Naruto blurted out in a seductive whisper when he was skimming his bottom lip along the border of her ear. She shivered in delight. His words were strong, she thought, as they stole the wind from her body, barely leaving her with enough to breathe. His words took, they gave, and they lasted. Her blood was hot as it coursed through her veins. It heated her flesh as it circulated in her body, and took her hormones for an epic and memorable ride. "Nah, Naruto-kun," Hinata stammered, her gaze averted to the side. "Can I taste your milkshake?" "My milkshake?" Naruto pondered, though he kept his expression even. He wasn't sure of what she asked, but that gave him a marvelous idea. "Sure," he agreed, casting her one of those crooked smiles she loved so much. "Promise," she pressed. "Pinky promise." She felt as he rested the weight of his body on one hand so that he could lightly knot and yank her pinky finger with his own. She smiled at him, her eyes beaming, needing his caress again. With one aim in mind now, Naruto started kissing her, showing her how, teaching them both. He stopped for air, and then took her lips again. First, he slowly, gently, imperiously, skimmed his bottom lip across the fullness of hers, and she trembled in a most satisfying way. He made the journey again, but, this time, his tongue was what moved over her bottom lip. The princess sighed, which made her lips part, and he capitalized on the opportunity by dipping his tongue into her mouth, mating with hers. "Naruto-kun," she uttered his name beneath her breath when he had freed her. And he wondered how she would react when teased, deprived of what she sought, what she needed. Would the shy Hinata writhe beneath him? He couldn't help but consider, too, would she demand as much as she gave, or would she lie back like a corpse once she chose to surrender? Was her show of passion a folly, or a glimpse of her true character? He needed to know. Like a snake, majestic, precise, and amble in its movement, Naruto slithered to Hinata's neck where he nuzzled her throat. She offered her neck to him in response, and he accepted without a trace of hesitation. Slowly, He ran his tongue along that sweet, narrow column before nipping the sensitive flesh beneath her jaw. Her hair caressed his face and he smelled openly in its silky touch. Prolonging the reptilian characteristics of the snake, graceful, decisive, swift and efficient in its feats, Naruto coaxed, teased, and caressed until his fair princess lay still. She was intoxicated. Her breaths were heavy, and yet, she was ready for more, much more. He hovered over her, looking deep into those gorgeous eyes glazed with what he had already given to her. But he was only just getting started. When the sage got off the bed, his determination and courage mostly fueled by the intensity of his arousal, Hinata slapped her hands over her eyes and didn't even attempt to peek through her fingers. He was starting to pull down his boxers. The princess was curious about the color of his underwear, but still, she had no intention of looking. It didn't take long before she was breathing through parted lips as anticipation shaped the content of her thoughts. But when she pursued her lips and tried stifling her panting breaths, a moan rose in her throat as a result. This won Naruto's undivided attention, and intent gleamed in the warrior's oceanic eyes. He made his way back onto the bed, on all fours, and, even then, Hinata still covered her eyes. The intensity of his aura forced hers back, masculinity overpowering femininity. Her body sagged in delight at that. "Hinata," he called when he was hovering over her again. "Be nervous and embarrassed, but there's absolutely no reason to be afraid." Gradually, she lowered her hand. "Don't cower away from what I have to give. The sooner you decide to accept what I have to offer, the sooner you decide to see and feel, is the sooner your anxiety will subside as familiarity grows. Your desire will partly help you to feel less queasy." The sides of Naruto's mouth pulled up into a triumphant smile as Hinata's mood shifted, but she perceived his expression as being compassionate. He lowered his body onto hers when she cupped his forearms in a telling gesture, his sensual force intense and unconcealed. He stared at her, always her eyes first, for an answer, a permission to take, to sample. Her lips seemed to call him, and Naruto noted how they curved and would fit perfectly against his own. Steadily, her lids fell and her eyes soon closed. Her lips gaped, as if an invitation, and, once again, Naruto readily accepted. He homed in close and savored her flavor. She responded. Every part of her did. Her heart drummed out of control and, again, it was not just her heart, never just her heart. She wanted to pull away to breathe, to release what she was feeling in the form of sound, but what she really wanted was more. Naruto read her mind, or understood what the instinctive squeezing of her thighs together meant, but then, he remembered his promise. "Are you ready to taste my milkshake?" he asked suddenly, even as he moved, shifting the weight of his body to the edge of the bed. He seated himself there, his feet grounded. Hinata was thrilled that he remembered and a smile touched her lips, though, it wasn't long before the icy hand of nervousness coiled around her insides. Her chest tightened and her stomach did somersaults, but she wasn't going to allow this opportunity to pass her by. The princess hadn't the foggiest clue where this seed had latched on to her from, but she knew this fantasy had grown on her. And she was ready to experience, to have what she craved. As she moved over the bed, she realized how heavy her body was, just how much her muscles had weakened in her state of arousal. Needless to say, this wasn't enough to keep her at bay, and it wasn't long before she was confronted with it, his. She knew the organ as in her textbooks. And, needless to say, she had never seen it before, evident by the expression of abject shock smeared over her face. Her mouth hung open and she tried to remember how to breathe, even as she gawked at her prince's throbbing pole. It was a miracle she hadn't fainted. Sitting innocently on her heels before him, his legs open, the princess tried her best to pay attention to his nerve-wracking presensation over the loud hammering of her heart and the sharp stare of his. Naruto told her about the sensitive and fragile areas of it, as if quoting from a book. He emphasized that the most pleasurable part was his crest. He labeled, he touched, turning it this way and that, as he explained how he would like to be touched. Blunt. Yes. Arrogant. Pretty much. All the while, Hinata wondered how Naruto came about knowing these things. She surmised perhaps Tsunade wasn't dispatching him on enough missions. Or maybe they were of a low rank, because he obviously had far too much free time on his hands to explore. Do you understand? Naruto asked when his lips had stopped flapping consecutively. Hinata heard, or rather, she heard enough, but spared no response to his question. Instead, she kept staring at his erection that had kept shrinking as he spoke. Like a fairly intrigued scholar, she gaped in fascination. But, as soon as he took note of her captivation, and how her lips parted in a lustful manner, his arousal returned. Like a unique flower, granted with just enough water and sunlight, his vessel pulsated and then began to grow. Gradually, it veered upright and expanded in both length and width. And like hardened soldiers, meditating for a ferocious battle, the veins stood firm and more pronounced on his throbbing shaft. Hinata was astounded. But through this emotion and many more, hesitatingly, she slowly reached for him, her eyes ever fixed, and coiled her tiny fingers around the warm width of him. The young maiden examined him in her hand before tentatively taking him inside of her mouth, upon the red carpet that was her tongue. She relished in the heat emanating from his member. Improvisation was her best friend in this moment. She didn't hesitate to explore and experiment. With arousal as her guide, her encouragement, her energy source through which she derived confidence, the sky was the limit. Like a blindfolded child, curious about the flavor of an ice cream cone she had been given, Hinata licked, sampling the taste of his tip. She must have really liked it, because her eyes drifted close, and then she ucked his crest, coating him with her saliva. She laved her tongue from his base to the crown of his rigid length, certain her explorations were not in vain, as Naruto groaned and frowned in delight. He complimented her creativity when she teased his neighbors, but soon told her it would have felt even more amazing if she slowly stroked his shaft while also pleasuring him with her mouth. Without a word, only a subservient and lustful gleam in her gaze, Hinata did what she was told until she got frustrated, and in more ways than one. Naruto-kun, she whimpered adorably, reclining from her knees to her heels. Why isn't Naruto-kun's milkshake coming out? Naruto smiled. He was eager to have her mouth on him again. Try using instead of your hands, he suggested politely, despite his hunger. She nodded her head, always looking adorable and innocent, regardless of what she was about to do. Am I doing it right? She asked, when the length of him was nestled at her cleavage. Does it feel good? You need to move first. Her gleaming crystal eyes widened, alarmed. I need to move, like this. She looked up at him while she worked her tiny hands, embarrassed, to study the flickers of emotions over his handsome face. His responses plainly answered her question. And, upon taking him inside her mouth again, she mumbled something, another question, maybe. Whatever it was, Naruto found it extremely cute and erotic. Hinata could sense her knight's escalating excitement. She could feel him hardening in her mouth, and was reassured that she was doing an exceptional job. This added to her desire and self-confidence. When his hips started thrusting of their own accord, Hinata found herself choking at intervals. But was reluctant to stop. Naruto was thankful for her persistence as consistency was crucial, if he were to derive a fulfilling orgasm. Hinata, he suddenly called, frowning, his body bracing for the imminent tremor, one of which was always welcome. I'm about to come. Don't stop. What do you mean? Your milkshake is coming. In my mouth. She urged in between shicking. I want all of it inside my mouth. Releasing her breasts, the princess firmly clasped his shaft. Without pause, she stroked him, gradually increasing her pace as she his silky crest. And when Naruto's hips came to a sudden halt, when his eyes squeezed shut and his body trembled and jerked, Hinata knew it was here. As soon as his steely shaft started throbbing fiercely in her hand, she felt a warm and thick fluid building on her tongue. For a moment, the feeling was beyond words, and she felt empowered as Naruto continued to shake and groan hopelessly before her. The princess kept her composure, and when the tremors of his body ceased, Naruto watched as her eyes drifted close. He listened to the pleasant sound in her throat as she swallowed every last drop of him, another cute and erotic sound. "Yummy," she said looking up at him, like a child, proud that she had drunk her entire glass of milk. Naruto wanted to say something, but he was too busy catching his breath. He felt an unusual fiber of satisfaction. His masculinity seemed to roar with a sense of fulfillment at the fact that she had happily helped herself to his essence. Something warm pulsed in his ego and in his loins. His responses made Hinata far more aroused than she was before, and she hoped he would, in turn, make her experience what he just did. He needed to. She felt as though she would lose her sanity if he didn't. She needed his hands on her. She needed to be touched, and soon. "You were amazing, princess," Naruto praised, and, for the first time, Hinata stopped, studied, and could effortlessly dissect the gleam in his eyes. It was appreciation. "What's wrong?" He noted her anxious eyes. Embarrassed, she looked to the side and began tapping her forefingers together before she found the courage to greet his eyes. "Naruto-kun has never called me that before," she pointed out quietly. "That's because, until today, you were only the princess to the Hyuga clan. But now, you're also my princess. We can no longer be friends, Hinata. From this day forth, I'm yours and you're mine." The beautiful maiden felt her cheeks heat, and her eyes widened as she sought for something to say that would minimize her shyness. This was only a dream, right? But what about Sakura? Sakura-chan's heart belongs to someone else. Sasuke-kun. Through the pain of losing Sasuke, our friend and comrade, Sakura-chan and I have undoubtedly become closer. But there's an invisible border that she refuses cross. I've accepted that fact, Hinata, and, by doing so, I've come to realize how much you captivate me. He smiled his famous crooked smile, and then reached out to cup her chin. It wasn't until I let go was I able to hold on to something else, something more precious. Hinata could feel her pulse drumming behind her ears. It was amazing that, even after seeing her Prince shear, his mere words could have had such a fierce impact on her. But his touch fueled and reignited the flames of her desire and, with that potent fire, came bravery. As light as a feather atop the still waters of a pond, Naruto brushed away the smear of his essence from her scarlet cheek. Right then, Hinata cupped his hand so that she could SCK that thumb, tasting his unique flavor again. A bit surprised, Naruto beamed at her, a warm emotion bubbling up inside of him. "Honestly, you're so beautiful." Hinata blushed deeply. Reclining on her heels, she looked down and noted that his lolly had shrunk. The difference when he was flaccid and rigid was remarkable. Naruto-kun. What happened to your?" she asked, alarmed, freaking out. Did I do something wrong?" Naruto was stunned, not by what she assessed, but how she boldly pronounced the D word without the tiniest bit of embarrassment. "Don't panic. You didn't do anything wrong," he assured softly, hardly able to suppress his amusement. "This happens whenever a guy experiences an orgasm, but I'll be ready again, in a few minutes. Until then," he cupped her hand and ushered her to her feet. "Why don't I pay attention to your needs?" Hinata's center clenched in response to his suggestion, her silent glee spreading to her inner goddess. And although she could only blush and avert her eyes, being caressed by him once more was something she deeply yearned. Her eyes shone so brightly that he must have seen her hunger. Like a wild, golden tiger, striding gracefully toward its weakened prey, Naruto crawled onto the bed, on all fours, toward Hinata. She was lying on her back in submission, eagerly awaiting her prince's sensual touch. Making his way to her torso, slowly and collected, one knee between her thighs, our hero took the liberty of licking the hard peak of one nipple. He did so with long, lazy strokes of his tongue, over and over again. And his lady moaned. She cupped his head firm in her tiny hands by the time he moved on to the next impressive skyscraper, where he licked, shicked, and savored thoroughly. Naruto loved her verbal responses so much that he lightly nipped and pulled that nipple, to make her voice climb higher. He received his wish, and her adorable moan broke off into a tantalizing gasp of desire. "Nah, Naruto-kun's shicking my brea. STS, she breathed a mental breath, her lips parting. It feels so good. I can feel Naruto-kun's tongue on my nipples." The moment Naruto gently bit down around an aching peak, he heard his name rose from her throat, in a most amorous way. It conducted the flames of his desire, and a new priority suddenly made itself known in his mind, one of which he had every intention of acting upon. His eyes, now half-lidded, gleamed with intent. "Hinata," he whispered, just high enough so that she could hear. "Can I take your panties off?" The princess gasped, stunned, her eyes popping, and a fierce heat dawned in her cheeks, the likes of which she had never felt before. She could feel her head getting light as blood surged like lightning throughout her veins, an all too familiar feeling. Hinata withdrew her eyes as she sought for resources. Her nerves hummed so intensely that she lost the ability to speak. And each time she gathered a bit of composure, her heart thumped, scattering all the pieces again. "Hinata, please, try to calm down," Naruto advised, but then fell silent when she hugged a pillow over her face. "Hinata, nah, Naruto-kun," she interrupted in a nervous, high-pitched tone, eager to tell him what was on her mind before the very sound of her voice devoured the touch of courage she had mustered up. "About what you asked. Why, you can do it." Our golden knight could feel the heat radiating from Hinata's hot pocket. It was like a tangible creature in the room, brushing its body against his as it pumped his member, coaxing him to make haste. And Naruto smiled openly. "As you wish," he replied softly, the soothing sound of his voice cajoling her from her shell. When he doffed her underwear with slow, steady movements, Naruto held it up before his face. He swore to God he could see heat emanating from the puny piece of cloth. "Steamy," he murmured unconsciously, embarrassing Hinata. And she responded by masking her face with her hands. "Nah, Naruto-kun and I are both alone in his room. What should I do? What should I say to him?" She gushed. What would father think of this? With each time she throbbed, the awareness of being and subjected to his gaze became increasingly intense for Hinata. She could smell her arousal, and she was certain he could, too, which made her self-conscious. Nevertheless, she had already told herself that there was no turning back from this. It was what she wanted. Like the ticking of a clock, she could feel her pulse drumming at the center of her core. It felt like a gap needed to be filled, desperately so. And, as fierce as her embarrassment boiled, it couldn't rival how aroused she had become. How thrilling it felt, that her one and only love was looking at her hot body. "Hinata," he called compassionately as he crawled onto the bed, towering over her. The girl shivered with delight at the sound of her name upon his lips. Had her charming prince come to soothe her heart and mind with his angelic voice? Had he come to answer to her body's raw hunger? She hoped he had come to address both, and even more. Although she did not look, Naruto took his time to lay claim to her soft lips, a gesture of reassurance, she was sure, sweet and promising. His kisses always left her breathless. And those breaths continued to come quick, as their heat intermingled and their auras clashed. From her neck down, Naruto initiated a saucy chain of kisses. With each touch of his lips upon her vulnerable flesh, her body trembled and muscles went taut. He whispered words of affection against her skin. Her stomach sank when he dipped his tongue inside her navel. And she heaved a shuddering sigh when his epic journey ensued farther down south. Just before he tasted her, he whispered, "Hinata, stay with me. Stay with me and feel." Her blood bubbling beneath her skin, the princess rubbed her thighs together in her state of impatience, building the heat as if she sought to start a fire. And Naruto couldn't help but wonder if she wanted him to scorch his tongue, when he decided to sample her morning dew. How mean, he grinned. The instant he touched her legs, her thighs separated, almost automatically, and he smiled a triumphant smile. "Tears of joy are flowing out of here," Naruto prompted brazenly as he studied Hinata's most sacred treasure. He felt as her body stiffened at his words, but his eyes remained unswerving. "You're so beautiful down here, Hinata," he flattered candidly, embarrassing her even farther. Before she could respond, he cupped her hips and pulled her closer. Then lowered his head toward her hot, swollen center. At first, there was only the puff of his breath, and she tensed in anticipation. Her body responded immediately, every nerve ending hummed, and sparked to life. After filling his lungs with the intoxicating scent of her, Naruto parted her tenderly and then slowly, gently, lightly, stroked her with the very tip of his tongue. Hinata's blood was thundering by this point, her mouth wide open, her head nestled fast into the pillow. She could feel the steam building up inside, and she dropped her hands to her sides and gripped the sheets, eyes tightly closed. She spread her legs as far as they could go and wished she would experience something even more spectacular. This was the most incredible feeling that she had ever. Naruto licked her again, his tongue laving over sensitive lips. This time, his tongue was flat, and seemed hotter and wetter than before. It was as though he had reacquainted himself with a blistering flame optimized for ultimate stimulation. Pant, pant. As her head veered from left to right at the import of sizzling pleasure, she closed her legs and bounded Naruto's head between them. "Nah, nah, Naruto-kun," she called breathlessly. "I haven't had enough training for this. Yes, it feels so good." Naruto could almost laugh, but, instead, he licked his lips, sampling her flavor again. "You don't need training for this kind of thing, Hinata. But it feels like I'm losing myself." He couldn't help but grin. "That's how you're supposed to feel, princess, don't resist. Lose control and go wild." "Oh, no, why does it feel so good?" she moaned, her voice thick with desire, her panting breaths filling the room. From bottom to top, Naruto covered every inch of her with his tongue, and then he returned to that one special place and reintroduced himself. The gratification made her cry out, like a cute puppy. And he did it once more, just to have her whimper again. In a fever, a frenzy of carnal energy, Naruto circled and teased and rubbed and shicked. He slowly, carefully, fluently, slipped a finger inside her home and caressed her from the inside. Hinata groaned, she begged, she writhed, and her head at this new and overwhelming level of sensuality. The gap was close to being filled, but she needed more. That's what she said, and yet, Hinata had to do everything in her power to hold in the warm, downcoming sensation that arrested her body. "Nah, Naruto-kun," she whispered his name, like a prayer. "Oh, my God, oh, my God." Hinata could feel herself getting wetter and wetter. She was drenched, swollen, and excited to the point of discomfort and still held back because she had never felt anything as incredible as what she felt now. She didn't want it to ever end. No one had ever seen her bare flesh, touched her, much less to sample the taste of her feminine nectar. But in the end, which was probably 3 minutes later, she had no choice. Something's coming. She covered her mouth with both hands, even as they trembled radically along with her body, and screamed her surrender. Hinata's body arched off the bed, but still Naruto continued to lick her sensitive bubble, bringing her even higher in her glorious climax. And her body seemed to glow in the sun's ethereal light. The waves of pleasure swept her into another dimension, muscles convulsed in a rippling release, an orgasm that went on and on to no seeming end, a fantastic finish. It was only after Hinata's body sank back onto the bed did Naruto finally raise his head. He couldn't get enough. His expression was bright, and the glow in his eyes, mystical. There were no words to describe how magnificent, adorable, and arousing Hinata's responses were. They all added to his desire. For a brief moment, he looked down at himself, at the byproduct of her lascivious behavior, and then back at her. The grand finale was still yet to come, and Naruto throbbed vigorously in excitement. But for the hot, steamy breaths that escaped her unpainted lips, the exhausted princess lay silent in bed. She was smiling, although her body was a delicious wreck. The powerful waves of her orgasm continued to wash over her. And, with an arm resting across her forehead, she kept her eyes closed. Her subconscious and inner goddess were curled up together in bed, and asleep, sated by their coinciding climax. Hinata, Naruto whispered, his voice layered with many different facets of emotions. You were amazing. The compliment rode upon the lapping waves of her orgasm and stretched her lips into an even wider smile. But the princess still did not speak. She was enraptured and numbed by this new and overpowering level of contentment she had been given. But still, she wanted more. That aching gap, deep within her core, was not yet filled. So she waited, in a state of incomplete satisfaction, for her Prince Charming to coax the embers of her desire into even greater flames. He knew this was what she wanted, right? Time pasted. For well over a minute, there was only silence, and Naruto watched in utter disappointment as his erection withered as of neglect. But he, too, said nothing. He didn't want to admit it to himself, that for the first time since Hinata fell on top of him and he touched her lips with his own, he was not sure of what to do next. What he assumed was Hinata's orgasm was incredibly intense and, for a moment, he was almost completely flustered, frightened. He saw her pant, gasp, moan, scream, writhe, shook, and then stilled. Was that all because of pleasure, or had he caused her pain, as well? Had he been too rough without noticing, blinded by his own selfish greed? The room became so quiet that the silence was an uncomfortable pressure against Hinata's eardrums. She felt vulnerable in her intoxicated state. Her body was a fragile mass of sensitivity and reception. All the mental and emotional walls that she had erected for her own protection had deteriorated under the weight of a fierce orgasm. As she lay there on her back, legs bounded, she felt an ominous gloom creeping over her. It was a merciless and unforgiving storm of emotions, all tinted and strengthened with her frustration. She felt a spasm of panic when Naruto said and did nothing. Had her prince lost interest in their sacred ceremony of love and sensuality? Had she done something to offend him? Had she performed or responded in a distasteful way? While lost deep in thought, Naruto heard sniffling. By the time he raised his head, he was confronted with a weeping Hinata, the back of her hands pressed to her eyes. She wept beautifully, like a baby deity that fell from her home among the clouds, and yet, the sound of her crying made his heart sag. Naruto-kun, the agitated knight gasped in response. He wondered if his assumption were true, if he had really hurt her in some way. But he pushed that thought aside and made haste to put himself beside her. "Hi Hinata," he said her name with evident worry, as if he would opted to make an apology, before he actually inquired what was wrong. Please don't stop," she urged. "I want Naruto-kun to touch me," she sobbed. "I want Naruto-kun to touch me more." I'm sorry if I did something to upset you. Naruto was shocked, but not as much as he was relieved to the point where he could have smiled. But, in light of the miscommunication that had led them astray, he didn't. Hinata, listen, you didn't do anything wrong, I promise. This was all just a big misunderstanding. Naruto-kun. She lowered her hands shyly to look up at him. I love you, too, he whispered before lightly taking her lips. I know it might be embarrassing, but try to tell me how you feel and what you want every once in a while, okay? As for me, he was now whispering in her ear. I want to touch you, too, can I? Hinata was dazed, shuffling through the memory banks of her mind, desperately trying to recover that one file with Naruto's confession, to prove to herself that what he had said was not just an insidious hallucination. It was as if he read her mind, because his lips soon parted again, his warm breath kissing her pink cheeks. I've always had strong feelings for you, Hinata. I just needed to make sure of something. I love you, he confessed again, more passionately than he did before, his words bringing tears to her eyes. And I'm sorry I made you wait so long. Naruto-kun just said he loves me. Oh, what should I do? You don't need to say anything. His voice was feathery soft, his eyes doing that smoldering thing again. Just nod your head, if you want me to make you feel even more. Right then, Hinata felt a surge of courage, but her expression remained coy. It feels like I'm going crazy, she said while averting her eyes, even as she rubbed her thighs together. Then she flashed him such sizzling hot gaze that Naruto's own eyes widened with astonishment. Please, touch me more. I want Naruto-kun to touch me. Her response was far more endearing than he bargained for, but the combination of flavors made for a sweet aftertaste, delicious. As you wish, princess, it will be my absolute pleasure. Naruto's eyes hooded as he slowly reversed over Hinata's flushed and restless body. Her soft, smooth skin seemed to glow with a heavenly luster, its texture finer than that of any silk. He placed his hands atop her thighs, a silent incantation, and they opened for him. He filled his nose with the sweet scent of her arousal again, and then reacquainted his mouth with her intoxicating flavor, sending his taste buds on another epic ride that they wouldn't soon forget. Hinata's eyes were bright with need, her heart racing, and she watched as Naruto propped himself up on his knees between her now widely spread legs. He was clasping his pride in his hand. She knew what he was preparing to do, and the princess welcomed it, entirely. She wanted to become one with her beloved prince. Hinata. He won her attention effortlessly, his voice soothing, always soothing. Do you trust me? She nodded her head without any evidence of doubt. I want you to relax as much as you can, okay? This may hurt a little, but I can promise you that discomfort won't last long. Her eyes were shining, uncompromised. And Naruto could see that she was entirely willing and prepared for whatsoever he had to offer. If anything, she was impatient to receive. Ever vigilant of her facial expression, our hero carefully began to penetrate his sunflower, his crest stretching her to accommodate his shaft. For a split second, he found himself drifting into a fleeting state of reverie, thoroughly sensationalized and new. Slowly, light on his feet, he pushed two sturdy doors apart and entered into a world uncharted. It was like a sanctuary, a sacred cathedral color schemed of red and pink. Naruto stood upon a red, plush carpet that ran along the aisle of this magnificent paradise and into a blinding white light. Perfectly sculpted statues of Cupid stood in tandem at either sides of the great hall, playing their trumpets, a beautiful symphony that seemed to wrap his entire being into a warm, silky, seemingly moist cocoon. The sensation seemed to focus more on areas below his waist. No sooner had he drifted, however, than reality tugged at his consciousness. But, until most who were hurled back into reality from a sweet daydream, back into a supposedly bland, melancholy world, Naruto came back meeting a rivaling measure of sensuality that kept escalating at each passing moment. His shoulders sagged at the warm and unfamiliar environment within which he ventured. And he heaved a shaky sigh as Hinata opened and closed around him, wet and tight. He was in heaven. At the same time, the beautiful princess yelped in both pain and pleasure, a bittersweet mixture of ecstasy, to say the least. She bit down on her lip, and then reclined her head onto the pillow. She moaned aloud, trying to stifle her vocal responses, and yet a sharp whimper followed her in throat. Her heart was racing, lungs gasping desperately for air, eyes tightly squeezed shut, and every muscle in her body went taut. Still, her prince was able to delve even deeper. In a heartbeat, what was left of the princess's hymen faded to memory. She felt the truth of it with much certainty, but it came with no regrets, only contentment. The loss of her virtue was visible on Naruto's shaft as he slowly, meticulously, fluently, continued to deepen himself inside her world. I can feel something entering me, she moaned, her forehead creasing. It's so unusual, but it feels so good. Naruto-kun. Naruto entered but halfway inside of her tightly enclosed tunnel, mesmerized by her breathless panting and gasps. He moved in and out at an amble pace, careful not to venture farther than where he had initially explored. He wanted to know her responses, all of them. And his desire soared, like the searing flames of an active volcano, as he watched her move and writhe beneath him. She looked like a goddess, too beautiful, too majestic, and too graceful for a man's eyes. But given to him was the privilege to see and to touch, and he wanted even more. As soon as he was entirely coated in her feminine nectar, and her sacred realm had gotten somewhat accustomed to his width, Naruto decided to deepen himself move, until he could go no farther. Just before he did, however, Hinata requested on soft, rickety breath that he kissed her. With a brilliant light of hope shimmering in her eyes, she told him of her desire to have him lay on top of her. Needless to say, Naruto would not neglect her wish, nor would he allow his lady to wait. After capturing her lips with his for another time, a silent but telling gesture of his love, our hero allowed his body to rest atop hers. His hard chest pressed against her wrists, and they flushed under the pressure of his weight. Then he proceeded to ease the remainder of his length inside her, and she, in turn, eased her short, neat nails into his back. A soft but high-pitched whimper rose in Hinata's throat as the rest of her home was occupied, and she bit down in his neck. Naruto frowned, deriving more pleasure than pain from the bruise. The princess's body kept getting tense as she tightened around him. But Naruto told her it would only be more uncomfortable if she did not try to relax. He said so with sympathy and comforted her as much as he could with his lips, his eyes, and the anesthetic-like sound of his voice. His weight filled every slope and curve of her body. It got harder to breathe again, but the princess cared only about the thrill she felt. Her soft flesh seemed to mold into his like French vanilla infused with a very light shade of taffy. And it didn't take long before she got used to him. In time, there was no longer a bittersweet blend of ecstasy. That slight prick of pain, that unwelcome discomfort, had evaporated, like a blistering heat against condensation. More, Hinata demanded in a steamy breath against Naruto's ear. And in response, he throbbed and hardened inside her. Amazing, she exclaimed, relishing in the gratification. I can feel Naruto-kun deep inside me. It's embarrassing, but it feels so good. She could feel it, that familiar trigger before the turbulent avalanche. Now she was aware of what it meant, and she braced for impact. The door suddenly snapped open, a door that only her prince possessed the key to unlock. She bounded her legs around his waist as her body quaked and her muscles tightened. She screamed and clawed her nails into his flesh again, clinging desperately to him as the rapids rammed deliciously into her body. Her center was throbbing so fast Hinata knew if it were her heart, she would have likely suffered from a heart attack. She was careful to cling to him as the violent waters tried to drown her in its unforgiving depths. Her pelvic walls ucked at his manhood, eagerly awaiting the release of his essence so that it may devour. All of a sudden, Naruto released the entire weight of his body on top of her, and then hugged his princess close. He rolled over. Now, she was sitting on top of him, his steel nestled deep. It throbbed vigorously, whispering to the center of her heat. And those stimulated lips down south listened. They parted, and they spoke. Her morning dew coated his rod. The chemical was like an aphrodisiac. It drugged him, making the chivalrous night incredibly harder, hungrier for a release. And his steel hummed beneath her again. They pulsated together, as if joined in a sacred hymn of desire. But Naruto was at his limit. He could wait no longer. As drained and breathless as her orgasm had left her, Hinata took it up upon herself to merge their worlds once more. She heaved a long sigh as she slid down and filled herself with the delicious sighs of him. It may have been only for a moment, but she had missed her special tenant. The princess leaned forward against Naruto's chest, her tiny hands anchored upon his pectoral muscles, her hair in his face. They moved slowly together, fingers now entwined, his sighs harmonizing with hers. It wasn't long before Hinata was hungry again, hungry for a greater level of pleasure. Sitting upright now, either legs astride his waist, she moved about him with renewed energy and zeal. She felt an incredible rush of exhilaration at the thought of being on top of him and in charge. The position added to her desire. The princess rose and fell sinuously. With absolute control and precision at her disposal, she created magic at a pace she found favorable, taking him all inside when she needed to. Her love nest squeezed his package as she rocked this way and that, mindlessly willing to break him if it meant meeting another release. Pant, pant. Naruto's breaths came fast, utterly wrapped around the finger of desire. He watched as Hinata's creamy breasts danced, enticing him with a charm he could not resist. And he rose as his desire did, to contribute to the flames of their sensuality. He cupped her soft curves, squeezing them periodically, nipples nestled between his fingers. So deep, I can feel Naruto-kun deep inside me, Hinata uttered on a silky breath, her voice coated in a thick layer of carnal desire. Her body reclined at the import of pleasure, her head whipping back. Naruto pressed a scorching kiss at the hollow at the base of her throat, and then his nose drew a line up the skin of that sweet, slender column, to the point of her chin. The princess's eyes were smoky with arousal, and the moment she lowered her head, her prince sought and found what he craved. He kissed her, burning, crushing her lips with his in a deep, dark, wet kiss. No, nah, Naruto-kun, she cried between panting breaths, her vision blurred. Now Naruto had bent her over, hands bracing against the wall for support. She whimpered that they shouldn't do it as they were, that she could feel him all the way inside, his unwavering steel tapping against her uterus. And yet, her subconscious and inner goddess were sitting on their heels in bed, their kissing Brea. STS sleek with sweat as they both hugged under the overwhelming weight of sweet, sweet ecstasy. Don't stop. Hinata was drunk with pleasure. She moaned, muttering how good it felt. Her voice sounded as though it had been gilded a beautiful gold, kissed by a sweet hue of honey. She loved the position he had placed her in. It was new, incredibly intense and erotic. She felt entirely open, revealed, and dominated by him. The reins of control were tipped in his favor once again. And, with each time he slammed in hard and deep, she could feel the muscles tighten in her belly. Yes, she could feel and hear as his vessel stirred her juices deep inside. More, she demanded. Harder, she insisted. Have your complete way with me. Thrust deeper, even deeper inside. The princess had started working her hips as she spoke, breaking the rhythm of Naruto's amble movement, and he frowned in wonder. Had his performance not met her expectations? Was she perhaps mocking him? Give me more. Her commands ensued with an open smile, her lips drooping in a sultry fashion. Her breasts bounced as she moved frantically about him, reclining vigorously to meet his delicious forward thrust. It was evident what she craved, and she would indeed receive. Naruto's eyes imbued gray with desire, a fierce storm playing over those blue seas, stirring the once placid waters into an ocean of roaring, lapping waves. Dangerously close within this moment was the bridge between the thrill of battle and the thrill of lovemaking. Recklessly, Hinata challenged him, almost instinctively, and the raging seas got ever fiercer. She rolled her hips harder, the force of her motion driving him backward. And her realm tightened around him, squeezing the lean, rigid length of his shaft relentlessly. The princess knew the danger that lurked ahead, and it stirred her desire, promising her a more potent breath of gratification. Naruto's adrenaline coursed hot and fast through his veins. Strength, courage, endurance, determination, creativity, all were at its peak, ready to be molded together to forge a greater resolve. Characteristically, he had accepted her challenge and would strive to best her in this game of passion. Whether or not this was a battle, he would not lose. Pant, pant, it was hard to breath. The air was thin and dry with heat and desire. Their colliding bodies sang an erotic tune as Naruto kept charging in and out of her, stretching his soulmate to suit his length and width. She could feel his vanilla bar rubbing, scraping the highly sensitive walls of her sacred path. And Hinata moaned and panted in her escalating delight. Adorably, she frowned and growled when Naruto withdrew from her and guided her toward the bed. She whimpered and her inner goddess pouted, but only for a brief instant. Ecstasy wouldn't grant them the privilege of staying still, not this day, or any other day for that matter. Lying gracefully on her back at the edge of the bed, her legs wide open, the princess sighed and moaned when her love cast his thunderbolt inside her once more. She couldn't get enough, and her heat crept toward supernova as he kept thrusting in and out of her. Together, hand in hand, they climbed the treacherous mountain face of pleasure, scaling its heights in hopes of reaching the summit of ecstasy. Hinata's responsiveness had slowed significantly. She was drunk with pleasure and passion. And she bit down on her index finger and panted between her teeth, looking up through the haze cast by her eyes, at her darling prince. An excited grin stretched wide across his face when he noted her wondrous eyes on him, his bright teeth standing in vivid contrast to the deep russet color of his skin. She was surprised he could smile when they were both caught in a twisting whirlpool of thrill, raw and relentless. Suddenly, Hinata clutched the sheets, submitting to another powerful orgasm. The chibis that were her subconscious and inner goddess huddled together with a cute, prolonged mewl as Hinata screamed her release. And Naruto groaned as her muscles went in a frenzy around him. They were both exhausted. Their breaths came fast and hard, and the princess could feel the overwhelming strain that dawned on her body with this third climax. Compassionately, Naruto decided to give her ample time to catch her breath, and yet, when he looked into her eyes, he could still see that shimmering gleam of challenge. Had his latest performance still not suffice? Had he once again failed to slake his lady's insatiable lust? Our champion didn't intend to give up and, with that, he closed his eyes. Within mere moments, a gear clicked into place and there was a sudden shift in the atmosphere. A gateway opened openly to the privileged, and natural energy suddenly came gushing into his body. There was an unusual abundance of energy lingering in his room, and this sped up his transformation. Naruto's skin became cool as power filled and energized his system. The aches of his muscles lifted, and his breathing returned to normal. "I'm not done yet." Naruto's eyes flashed open with the mark of the sage, gleaming with renewed passion and challenge. Hinata gasped, her eyes widening with abject shock as her suddenly assertive knight pushed her legs back and plunged into her convulsing quarters once more. She cried out as the heat from his steely lever consumed her whole, spreading from the pocket it conquered throughout her entire being. Through her excitement, Naruto could feel Hinata's chakra oozing out through her pores. It was warm and soothing, it replenished him, and he leaned forward so that he could crush her breasts with his large hands. He kneaded them as though he were preparing noodles for ramen. The sage heard the sacred and absolute demands of desire. The celestial deity spoke to him and, he understood. With consistency the most important variable in his epic journey of conquest, Naruto kept pumping her, lifting her higher. He brought her to altitudes that rendered her breathless. The princess felt as though she was going to break, and the chibis laid passed out in bed from overdose. Just before all the wind was forced out of her, leaving her vulnerable to the weaving hands of unconsciousness, Hinata did quick work to active the power of her eyes and crippled his power source using her Jiyuken fist. Almost simultaneously, something heaved a long, shrilling roar inside Naruto, stirring its destructive powers and shaking its dark, parallel world. A measure of the Kyuubi's energy seeped into a dark portal, slipping through the dimensions to entice Naruto with its overwhelmingly dark force. He accepted the malicious energy, using it but to undo the handiwork of his fair lady, thus, correcting the flow of his chakra. Naruto-kun, the exhausted princess whispered between her lips, her breaths shaky and dry. She raised one hand in an ushering gesture, inviting him to lie beside her. Naruto was uneasy, and the gleam made of enigma that quivered in her eyes did little to loosen the knot his stomach had made of itself. He couldn't help but wonder if she was upset. He wasn't sure Hinata liked the idea of being handled the way she was, and the fact that she went so far as to attack him proved as much. Our beautiful Snuggly Wuggly hurried to strap her arms around her charming knight and bury herself against his hard body, her flushed cheek fast upon his chest. Naruto-kun was so amazing, she praised, and the truth of her words relieved our hero of his suffocating grief. "You're so beautiful." He shifted his head so that he could press a kiss atop her head. As he lay beside her, wrapped in the blanket that was her love and affection, Naruto seemed to understand why she was not displeased. Her response was not in defense, not in surrender, but rather, a challenging greed that swelled as ripely his own. In that fleeting moment of overwhelming pleasure and desire, her body wanted more while her mind wanted a quarter. Her resolve was an instinctive mistake, but perhaps one that preserved her sanity. "I love you. Hinata." He kissed her head once more. "I love you, too, so very much." The princess was so happy she could almost cry. But, instead, she crawled on top of him and held tresses of hair behind her ear as she leaned forward to remind herself the flavor of his lips. "Let's do it once more." Her voice was as light as cotton and as sweet as maple syrup. One final bout," Naruto clarified with a pleased smile. I want to taste Naruto-kun's milkshake again." The entranced knight raised a hand to her cheek, and her eyes trailed his fingers for a while before she held his gaze anew, hesitant, yet acute. His smile stretched into one of intent as he brought his fingers together and performed a technique. And Hinata's eyes widened when she felt a pair of hands loop underneath her arms and lift her from the bed. She muttered a series of incoherent questions in her confused state, but Naruto spared her no enlightenment. Instead, he cast his counterparts a gaze wrought of instruction and they both proceeded to hold Hinata in an upright sitting position. She sat on their joint arms, as though she were sitting in a swing, her hands clasping either one of their shoulders for balance. With purposeful strides, her seductive knight made his way between her open legs. He smelled deeply of her scent just before kneeling before her and treating his taste buds to her sacred elixir. Repeatedly, he dialed her number with his tongue. He dialed imperiously and with heaven-like grace. He dialed passionately with alternating speeds. He dialed until her loins rang and she demanded that he accessed her. Naruto moved quickly to dispose himself to her bidding. And she coiled her arms around his head as they scaled the rock face together, determined to stand atop that glorious peak. With each powerful and delicious thrust, Hinata's loins continued to ring, like a school bell, dismissing not only her composure but her strength to boot. Her core squeezed and screamed under the force of Naruto's spectacular performance. And she smiled an open smile in the sweet embrace of ecstasy. Without so much as a sound or instructional gaze, Naruto withdrew from her, and the clones brought their beautiful princess back toward the bed. Her star didn't make her wait long to feel that gap being filled once more. And while she lay on her back in bed, arched against him, her legs locked around his hips, she glimpsed the doubles watching them with desire lit in their eyes. It was true they merely were just a part of him, but the princess felt arousal at the fact that she was being watched. Naruto's mouth was hot on her skin. He scorched her flesh with fiery kisses, leaving a delightful heat in his wake. She was caught in his web of desire. His skin was wet, her body sleek with sweat. Exhaustion rippled through them both, still they moved together. The princess could feel him pulling her body in and moving deeper into her. She wanted to bite him, just to hear him screaming her name. She was enraptured and intoxicated. She could feel the delicious venom that was his energy, coursing, running deep inside her veins. It burned beneath her skin, and although her body was brimming with what she craved, that insatiable lust remained. She wanted more, fearing this might be the first and the last time she would be sampled by her beloved prince. Impatient hands, hungry mouths, panting breaths, desperate words. Naruto couldn't get enough, and, God, her adorable voice. Mutual understanding dawned in this moment as their consciousness seemed to link for but a fleeting instant. They were almost at the end of their epic journey. They were both aware, and, just before he exploded with his desires, he dismissed his clones, or rather, he lost focus of the technique due to the gratification of his imminent orgasm. Before Naruto could withdraw his member, to grant his lady the sustenance she craved, the measure of pleasure accumulated by his counterparts added to that of his own, and he ended up releasing his seed, deep inside Hinata's womb. He roared in delight, and the princess arched off the bed in response as a rippling orgasm washed through her like a fierce streak of lightning. She screamed and dug her neat nails into his defenseless flesh as they both trembled together. I can feel Naruto-kun's semen swimming into me. Warm. It's so very warm. I can feel it. The fulfilled warrior rolled off a happy and contented Hinata, allowing his love to catch her breath. And they clung together in a light stupor as the quake of their bodies gradually calmed and their pulse slowed. The couple hadn't realized just how exhausted they were, until they both drifted off into unconsciousness together. Naruto laid on his back in bed, completely pooped. His body felt like the aftermath of a train crash. At least he knew, for his very first time, he had performed exceptional well, except for the whole Sage Mode scenario. How embarrassing. Without warning, a flush staining her cheeks, Hinata sat on her heels in bed and lightly clasped her beloved's package in her tiny hand. Expertly brushing coils of hair behind her ear, she lowered her head so that she could lick his tip. Naruto exclaimed, shocked that she still hadn't had enough. Hi Hinata. He was already breaking out into a sweat. It's not as resilient as yours. I still need time to recover. Her inner goddess pouted, looking to her sister who shared her sentiments. They were both awake and ready for more. Please, just let me eat some more to regain my strength. I need Ichiraku's ramen. Tough luck. The princess returned in a casual, mutinous tone, blushing still. Naruto-kun didn't give me any time to rest, so he doesn't deserve any break, either. Hi Hinata. Be reasonable. He attempted to negotiate as he cupped her hands together so that she would release his overworked and chafed sausage. This is mine. She looked at it with an innocently straight face. And I will have it whenever I please. Serious C. Who are you? And what did you with the real Hinata? Naruto shouted aloud in his frustration, knowing that he was already doomed.